You gonna shoot me in front of everybody? Huh? Come on.
In 1968, Ellsworth "Bumpy" Johnson ruled much of Harlem with intelligence, discipline, and ruthlessness. A man of formidable reputation, Bumpy was feared and respected across the city. One chilling night, Bumpy ordered his trusted driver, Frank Lucas, to light a cigarette. Without hesitation, Frank obeyed, using the flame to burn a man alive. Frank, once a simple limousine driver, had grown into Bumpy's right-hand man, mirroring his mentor's ruthlessness. Under Bumpy's shadow, Frank had transformed into someone cold and calculating, just like his mentor. But no empire lasts forever. One fateful day, while shopping for electronics, Bumpy and Frank were discussing the downfall of America's middle class. Pointing at a television, Bumpy ranted about how capitalism was crushing the common man. Mid-sentence, Bumpy suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed. Frank caught him just before he hit the ground. But it was too late. Harlem's king had died of a heart attack, leaving Frank holding not just his body, but the future of Harlem's underworld. Bumpy's death sent shockwaves through the city. At his funeral, Harlem's elite, public figures, and flashy new gangsters gathered to pay their respects. The air was thick with tension and Jerry curl oil. These young gangsters were reckless, flaunting their wealth without understanding the discipline that kept Bumpy's empire intact. As Frank watched the crowd with a sharp eye, he saw no real grief. Only Bumpy's loyal German shepherd seemed to mourn. Many dismissed Frank as just a servant, but a relative of Bumpy approached him and shared something surprising. Bumpy had always spoken highly of Frank, even calling him the son he never had. He had even left a significant sum of money for Frank. Feeling both honored and burdened, Frank vowed to collect every penny owed to Bumpy and protect the legacy his mentor had built. But Harlem's underworld was no longer the same. A brash new gangster named Tango began muscling in, collecting protection money from businesses and threatening Frank's small betting operations. Tango's threats didn't shake Frank. He had learned from Bumpy that patience and precision win the long game. While others postured, Frank quietly plotted his rise. Frank decided to enter the drug trade, but his initial efforts proved disappointing. The profits weren't as high as he'd hoped, and the product wasn't up to par. One day, while showing his stash to some friends who had served in the Vietnam War, they scoffed at the quality. They told Frank the drugs in Vietnam were far superior. That conversation planted a seed in Frank's mind. If he could bypass the middlemen and source the product directly, he could dominate the market. Meanwhile, across the river in New York, Detective Richie Roberts was fighting his own battles. Richie's life was a mess. His marriage was failing, his career was on shaky ground, and his reputation in the police force was in tatters. Richie was too honest for his own good in a world where corruption was the norm. During a routine investigation, Richie and his partner stumbled upon nearly $1 million in unmarked cash. Instead of pocketing it like most cops would, Richie did the unthinkable. He turned the money in. Rather than being celebrated, Richie became an outcast. His colleagues saw his honesty as a betrayal. His personal life wasn't any better. His rampant womanizing and double life as an undercover cop drove his wife to file for divorce and fight for custody of their son. All Richie had left was his unwavering integrity. One night, Richie received a frantic call from his partner, who had shot a man in a black neighborhood. Richie rushed to help, but as the situation unfolded, he discovered his partner had been high on drugs during the incident. When Richie refused to cover it up, his partner panicked and fled. Days later, his partner was found dead from a drug overdose. On the body, Richie found a packet of heroin branded Blue Magic. The discovery marked the start of a new mission. Richie's boss, recognizing the scale of the corruption in the police force, tasked Richie with forming an independent team that reported directly to the district attorney. Richie's focus shifted to tracking the source of this potent drug flooding the streets. Back in Harlem, Frank Lucas was quietly consolidating his power. Unlike the loud and flashy gangsters around him, Frank understood that discretion was the key to success. Drawing from Bumpy's lessons, Frank aimed to outsmart his competition by doing what no one else dared, cutting out the Italian drug families that controlled the trade. Frank's old friend Nate helped him forge connections in Southeast Asia. Frank traveled to Thailand and struck a deal with producers in the Golden Triangle, the world's heroin hub. By sourcing pure heroin directly and bypassing intermediaries, Frank could offer a product that was both higher in quality and lower in price than anything else on the market. To smuggle the drugs into the U.S., Frank devised an audacious plan. Leveraging the Vietnam War, he hid the heroin in the coffins of fallen American soldiers. It was a gruesome but ingenious strategy. allowing him to ship massive quantities undetected. Frank's operation became a well-oiled machine. His brand, Blue Magic, flooded the streets of New York. It was an epidemic he had unleashed on the streets. With his newfound wealth, Frank bought nightclubs, luxury apartments, and a sprawling estate in New Jersey, where he moved his family from North Carolina. Despite his riches, Frank maintained a low profile, blending in rather than standing out. He brought his 5 brothers into the business, forming a loyal crew known as the Country Boys. Together, they ran the drug empire with precision and loyalty, values Frank had learned from Bumpy. One afternoon, as Frank sat in a cafe lecturing his cousins about discipline, he spotted Tango swaggering down the street, collecting protection money. Frank decided it was time to make a statement. He walked out and confronted Tango, demanding 20% of his earnings. Tango laughed in his face, mocking him as a nobody. Frank didn't flinch. Without a word, he pulled out a gun and shot Tango in broad daylight, dead. The street fell silent as everyone watched in shock. Frank's message was clear. He was not to be underestimated, and King Kong ain't got shit on him. That moment cemented Frank's reputation as a force to be reckoned with, and it sent a chilling warning to anyone who dared challenge him. Frank Lucas rose to power with military precision, building a drug empire that stretched far beyond Harlem and controlled much of New York's drug market. He was meticulous, smart, and always one step ahead. In the midst of his climb to the top, he attended a party and met Julianne, a stunning Puerto Rican beauty queen who stole his heart. They soon married, and Julianne brought out a softer side in Frank, yet he knew that in his dangerous world, having someone to love was a risk, a weakness his enemies could exploit. Despite the risks, Frank couldn't resist her charm. Frank had a unique philosophy for a gangster. Avoid flaunting wealth. While others paraded their riches, Frank dressed modestly, steering clear of flashy displays. But one fateful night, he let his guard down. At the fight of the century between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, Frank sat ringside in a luxurious chinchilla fur coat and hat, a gift from Julianne. His seats, better than even those of the Italian mafia, caught the attention of Richie Roberts, a determined cop on duty that night. Richie didn't know who Frank was, but he sensed that anyone exuding such power and wealth was worth investigating. Frank's aura seemed to be undefeated. Richie began digging into Frank's life. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became that Frank was the mastermind behind the Blue Magic heroin flooding New York and New Jersey. But taking Frank down wouldn't be easy. Frank's operation was airtight, and he had allies in high places, including corrupt cops willing to look the other way for a cut of the profits. One of these officers, Detective Nick Trupo, was especially brutal and greedy. To him, Frank was a cash cow. Nick and his men constantly harassed Frank, demanding bribes and making threats. But Frank wasn't easily intimidated. In a bold move, Frank had Nick's prized 1966 Shelby Mustang bombed in broad daylight, sending a clear message: he wouldn't be bullied. At the same time, Frank faced another challenge. Nicky Barnes, a local crime figure, began diluting Frank's product and selling it under the Blue Magic name. To Frank, this wasn't just bad for business, it was a personal insult. Tensions escalated quickly and violence followed. One night, assassins targeted Frank and Julianne as they left an event. Though they survived, the attack left Frank shaken. His carefully built empire was under siege. As if things couldn't get worse, the fall of General Saigon cut off Frank's heroin supply from Southeast Asia. His supplier, General Q Tang, advised him to quit while he was ahead. But Frank wasn't ready to give up. He scrambled to adapt, searching for new ways to keep his operation afloat. Meanwhile, Richie Roberts caught a break when Frank's relative was caught committing a crime. Under pressure, the relative agreed to wear a wire, leading Richie's team to a crucial shipment of heroin. The drugs were being smuggled into the U.S. on military planes, hidden among the belongings of returning soldiers. When the shipment landed, Richie's team conducted a thorough search, even inspecting coffins of fallen soldiers. They found the drugs, but a federal agent dismissed the idea that a black man could run such a sophisticated operation and ordered Richie to stand down. Frustrated but determined, Richie pressed on. As Richie's investigation gained momentum, Trupo and his men took advantage of Frank's vulnerable position. They raided his mansion, stole his emergency cash, and killed his beloved German Shepherd, a cruel act meant to humiliate him. Enraged and on the edge of losing everything, Frank contemplated killing Trupo. However, Frank's mother, sensing her son's danger, pleaded with Frank to find another way. Under immense pressure, Frank's resolve began to crack. He realized that one wrong move could bring his entire empire crashing down. Richie and his task force finally obtained a warrant to raid Frank's drug operation. The raid was a massive assault, with police storming drug apartments across New York. A fierce shootout erupted, leaving several of Frank's men dead or wounded, including his nephew Steve Lucas, who had given up a promising baseball career to work for his uncle. During the chaos, Frank was in a church, seeking solace in the midst of his crumbling empire. As he left, Richie arrested him. Confronting Frank face to face, Richie laid out the evidence, making it clear that Frank faced a lifetime in prison. But he also offered Frank a deal: reduced sentencing in exchange for cooperation. With no other options, Frank agreed to become an informant. He provided Richie with the names of dozens of corrupt cops, leading to one of the largest corruption crackdowns in New York history. Trupo, facing imminent arrest, chose to end his own life rather than face justice. Frank's testimony resulted in the conviction of over 100 individuals involved in the drug trade and law enforcement, dismantling the corrupt system that had allowed his empire to thrive. Years later, in 1991, Frank Lucas walked out of prison. The once mighty king of New York's drug trade was now just another face in the crowd. Richie, the man who had taken him down, was waiting for him. The two shared a cup of coffee, a quiet moment between former adversaries. As Frank walked through the streets of Harlem, he saw a world that had moved on without him. His empire was gone, his influence vanished. Frank Lucas was no longer a king, just a man alone, forgotten, and left to reflect on the choices that had led him there. And to lead you to more interesting stories, I recommend clicking on the videos on the right. Subscribe and drop a like to return for future videos. Grab your popcorn, enjoy yourself, and see you soon, my friend.